Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about business history, military history, military doctrine, and the practices of great military leaders, all by way of distilling from them lessons that we can apply to our businesses and professional practices to make them work better, be more successful. So, as I've mentioned many times on this show, this is a way for me to give back to you, my fellow citizens, for the kind of support that you gave my colleagues and me when I was in the military and continue to do so. Very different from what was going on when I was a child. So today is the 127th anniversary of the Battle of San Juan Hill. This is the famous incident where Teddy Roosevelt led the Rough Riders up what most people think was San Juan Hill. It was actually Kettle Hill, which was very, very close by. But in any event, it was part of the Spanish-American War. Eventually, the United States did win that war, and as a result, the Philippines became an American territory in essence. There were other changes. The Philippines was eventually given its independence and is now an independent country. It was kind of the height of what might be called American imperialism. Although by any measure, the Americans were slackers when it came to building an empire compared to the British and the Dutch and the Germans and the Japanese, etc. So, but in any event, this battle, and I'm gonna talk about the history of the battle first, so you can understand the context, and then we'll talk about some lessons to learn from it. So first of all. This being literally the 127th anniversary, the battle took place on July 1st, 1898, and it was near Santiago de Cuba during the Spanish-American War. So the strategic objective was to capture San Juan Heights, and this was. And this would give it sort of a critical launching place to gain control of Santiago, which was a major Spanish stronghold in Cuba. So, excuse me, the American forces were led by Major General William Rufus Shafter, and the U.S. forces included regular Army troops and volunteer regiments. Among them were the Rough Riders, which was a volunteer cavalry regiment led by Theodore Roosevelt. This was long before he was president. There were approximately 490 men in the Rough Riders. They were a mixture of cowboys and excuse me, and miners and Ivy League athletes, a very eclectic group, all following the very charismatic leadership of Theodore Roosevelt. Also there, I think little known, unless you're a real history buff, were what were known as the Buffalo Soldiers. So these were regiments of African American troops, including the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry, and there were roughly 2.5 times as many Buffalo Soldiers participating in the Battle of San Juan Hill as there were Rough Riders. And just to give you an idea, so this is a challenge coin. I came across it in some military exchange. This one is for the 9th and 10th Cavalry. I don't know if you can see that there. And there's a wonderful movie about the Buffalo Soldiers, and they really epitomized bravery and fidelity to duty in the United States Army. So altogether, there were about 8,000 American troops that took place, or that were involved in the Battle of San Juan Hill. The Spanish defenders who were defending the heights numbered roughly 750 men, so a tenth of the American forces. They were led by General Arsenio Linares, and they, you say, wow, it was such a lopsided 750 versus 8,000. But the Spanish were defending fortified positions. They had the high ground, which is, of course, a much easier position to defend because the attackers have to come uphill. They're under the guns of the defenders, hence why the Americans needed such a huge numerical advantage. And the Spanish defenders had positions both on San Juan Hill as well as Kettle Hill. Excuse me. So the Americans had to attack through jungle, and it was very slow going through this very thick, jungle environment. They had poor maps. There were logistical delays, and by the time they arrived at the base of the hill, they were under intense heat and fire from the Spanish defenders. So the initial assault was a frontal assault on Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill under heavy Spanish rifle and artillery fire. Now, artillery cannons, I believe howitzers had been invented by then, and so it was a dangerous assault for the Americans to make. The most famous part of the military action is Teddy Roosevelt's charge up Kettle Hill. Actually, it was a frontal assault on Kettle Hill, and he led from the front. Okay, so that was not necessarily what commanders of regiments did. He was a colonel, but Roosevelt felt he had to sort of set the tone, and he earned national fame for this very dashing, daring military action that he took. And actually, in 2001, of course, over 100 years after the event took place, and posthumously, Roosevelt was awarded the Medal of Honor for this daring action. So, in the event, the U.S. troops captured both Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill, forcing the Spanish forces to retreat to Santiago de Cuba. The casualties were heavy. Out of approximately 8,000 troops, there were around 1,300 U.S. casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. Spanish casualties were considerably fewer, but the Spanish could not afford to be losing men, and so the losses were a strategic loss for the Spanish troops. The victory at San Juan Hill was also a symbolic victory because it really showed the American bravery making this frontal assault, and it boosted U.S. morale throughout the country, as well as launching Teddy Roosevelt's political career. So the battle led directly to the siege of Santiago, and it eventually fell about 2 weeks later on July 17th, 1898. This was the turning point in the Spanish-American War, and it really signaled not just the decline, but really just the unraveling of Spain as a colonial power in the Americas. South American countries started fighting for their independence, and over the succeeding decades, Spain lost essentially all of its influence and power in the Western Hemisphere. And the legacy is still stands to this day. So the daring charge led by Theodore Roosevelt up Kettle Hill stands still as a hallmark of Army bravery. Uh, Roosevelt, too, and interestingly enough, praised the Buffalo Soldiers for their bravery in the battle, their fortitude in battle, and they became. And he became legendary throughout the United States, eventually rising to the presidency in 1901. So, uh, you know, you can see how it's hard for us to appreciate this because we don't have the sort of sense of gallantry in combat any longer. Wars are heavily mechanized. There's no, cavalry dashes on horseback, and these kind of war today is really typically asymmetrical against terrorist groups and that sort of thing. So I think it's hard for the contemporary mind to really appreciate just how galvanized Americans were by what happened at San Juan and Kettle Hills, and what an icon Theodore Roosevelt became as a result of this. But it really changed the perspective of Americans at the time. So there are many lessons that we can take from a business perspective from the battle at San Juan Hill, and the first one and the obvious one is that bold leadership inspires action. Okay, Teddy Roosevelt leading from the front, leading his Rough Riders to victory. Basically, it as I mentioned just a moment ago, it not only inspired his 490 eclectic cowboys and miners and Ivy League athletes, it really captured the attention and romance of Americans in general. So any business leader can capture the same sense of elan, we call it. Um, Romance may not be quite the right term for business, but really sort of capture the spirit of his team by leading from the front, by really showing that he's really 110% committed to what the business is all about. And especially when a shift in momentum is required to get the business moving into a different and better direction, this kind of bold leadership really can make the difference. So, leadership needs to be visible, it needs to be decisive, it needs to show personal commitment from the leaders of the company, of the organization, in order to drive the innovation or the motivation and the enthusiasm of the team. So an example of this is in starting in around July 2017. So Tesla's Model 3 car was in production, and there was a very severe crisis in production. So animation was failing, there were production bottlenecks, and orders were increasing. It was really the sort of point in time when Tesla really started to begin to take off. And Elon Musk realized that this was an inflection point for his company, and so he slept on the Tesla floor during this period from, like I said, around July 2017 till about mid 2018, for about a year, in order to demonstrate to the people working at Tesla that he was absolutely deeply committed to the success of this venture. Right now, for all of what you may think about Elon Musk today and what he's been involved with, as you know, I set the politics aside. There's no doubt that back in 2017, 2018, for the leader of a company to do something like that was a bold move. And it turned out to be the right move because the production problems got straightened out. They fixed the automation, and Tesla went on to become the most valuable automobile company in the world. Now, they've certainly had their challenges of late, but there's no denying the dominance of Tesla as a car manufacturing company and technology company on the worldwide stage. And so Elon Musk was willing to display bold leadership in order to bring that about at the point of when the company hit the point of crisis. Okay, the next issue, or the next lesson, I should say, is so excuse me. So preparation can be inadequate. You're going to have to adapt anyway. Okay, so as I mentioned in the history I gave of the battle, the U.S. troops, they didn't have good maps. They were not properly equipped. They had to slog through this jungle, and they didn't really have the proper tools to do that well. And so it was, they had to adapt to these chaotic conditions in real time. And in the event, they did, right? And they were successful. So businesses require innovation, but even more so agility, especially when the proverbial fit hits the shan, right? Plans go awry. Almost inevitably, they go awry. We need to count on that, and we need to build into our teams agility so that when faced with the plans falling apart, they can make the pivots, the changes in direction that are necessary in order to still achieve the objective. So, Airbnb is a good example of this during the COVID-19 period. This was, in 2020. So, um, they really had to adapt their business model, and they had to pivot to local travel and online experiences, because people weren't flying, so they weren't going to fly from Los Angeles to New York and get a BNB, an Airbnb in New York. That was just not going to happen. Now, nobody anticipated the COVID-19 situation, and so whatever plans Airbnb might have made, they didn't make plans for that, right? And so they, on the fly, they figured out, well, so instead of relying on business travel and interstate travel or international travel, we're going to pivot and have people staying locally, maybe just to have a change of scenery, things like that. And in the event, they were pretty successful in making that pivot and sustaining their business, right? And so this shows you that the adaptability and agility of a business is crucial, especially when something happens that just really can't be anticipated. Okay, and that's the main thing. So clearly, the leadership of Airbnb had the ability to do this, even though there were no contingency plans for such a thing as a global travel shutdown that happened during COVID-19. Okay, so next, you need to leverage momentum. Okay, and that is what, so the Rough Rider frontal assault up Kettle Hill, led by Teddy Roosevelt. So he created momentum among his roughly 500 cavalrymen, and that one small part, less than 10% of the American troops, right, created enough momentum to carry the rest of the 8,000 troops into the battle and on to success, capturing both, as I mentioned, San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill, and then eventually going on and capturing Santiago as well. So we don't always need to start out with the entire organization being successful. Sometimes, if we can engineer a small success, as long as we quickly build on the momentum created by that small success, so then we can pull the whole organization to victory, right? So oftentimes it's better to initially focus resources on creating a smaller success that will build some momentum than it is to try and get the whole, parade moving. So the idea is to, first of all, create that small success at the proper moment, and then to be prepared to build on it in order to keep the momentum going. So, a good example of this in the business world is Netflix, right? So they started out, as I've talked about in other shows, as a sort of a mail, DVD service, and then they eventually got into streaming. Okay, and so they're the success they had as a mail order DVD or mail order rental DVD service, they were able to parlay that into success as a streaming service, and from there they were able to produce original content and become one of the most significant content producers in the world today. So network produces a tremendous amount of video content, uh, because they were able to create some momentum initially as first a mail rental service, and then building from there, right? And so I don't know if the founders of Netflix had in mind, to become one of the largest producers of entertainment media in the world when they started out the service. I suspect probably not. But in any event, they were able to capitalize on their initial success that created some momentum. They steamrollered the largest video rental company in the United States at the time, Blockbuster. Eventually, Blockbuster went bankrupt, and today Netflix competes with the largest of the legacy studios, whether it's NBC Universal, whether it's Paramount, whether it's Disney Fox. Netflix competes with them absolutely toe to toe, along with other new entrants like Apple, right? And so by getting going, that's the most important thing, because then you can leverage the momentum and go on to bigger and better things. America is a maritime nation. Our freedom and security depend on strong sea services. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League stands with our Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine through community support, education, and advocacy. For over 120 years, Americans of all walks of life have heeded our call. No prior military service is required to join our mission. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Help us support those who serve at sea. Visit NavyLeague.org. I realize I didn't reset my crawl and background image, so was quickly doing that during the break. So we're talking about the 127th anniversary of the Battle of San Juan Hill, which also took place on Kettle Hill on Cuba, led to the victory at the over Santiago de Cuba, and America eventually winning the Spanish-American War and solidifying the decline of Spain as an imperial / global power, and especially in the Western Hemisphere. So we talked about some business lessons that we can take from the Battle of San Juan Hill. The first was bold leadership inspires action. The second was preparation can be inadequate, but you have to adapt and be agile anyway. And the third was we need to leverage momentum, and that is a strategy actually aimed at creating a small victory first that then we can build on may very well be a much better strategy than trying to lead, than trying to create a victory for the overall organization from the get-go. Okay, so those are three. Let's go on and look at some more now. So excuse me, collaboration beats competition within teams. Okay, and the various units that participated in the Battle of San Juan Hill. I've mentioned the Rough Riders a number of times. I've also mentioned the Buffalo Soldiers. They had both cavalry units, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, and infantry units, the 24th and 25th. So there were numerous regular Army units as well as volunteer Army units. And rather than creating a competition between the regulars and the volunteers, the American commanding general Shafter, he really looked to create a collaborative plan so that all the units worked together most effectively in order to achieve victory. And that's really what we want to do in our companies and organizations as well. I know there was a time it was very popular to have sort of internal teams set one in competition with another. And while that may work in some limited circumstances, overall, it's much better off to foster an environment of cooperation among different parts of your organization so that everybody is working to achieve the same goals. Okay, so we don't want to create a situation where efforts are siloed. So the marketing people, they're doing their thing, and the sales people are doing their thing, and over in product development, they're doing something else, right? We want all of the parts of the company working together for the overall benefit of the organization. So one of the reasons that Apple cites for its launch of the iPhone being so successful in 2007 is because Apple really succeeded in bringing unprecedented cooperation between hardware developers, software developers, marketing people, breaking down all the internal silos and all focusing on launching this new technology that we now call smartphones, and in a way that it didn't limit innovation the way it had in the past. Okay, and so that's that's one of the key reasons why the iPhone, it wasn't just that the iPhone was so revolutionary and so cool, basically. I mean, there's been lots of revolutionary and cool products that have been introduced that went nowhere. So rather than risk the flop of its product, right, because of internal squabbling, the leadership of Apple really worked to create, again, an interactive, web is the wrong word, an interactive, cooperative environment in Apple so that all the different parts were seeking the same goal, right? And that's what we want to do with our businesses as well. We can't do product development or new service development in a vacuum. We have to do it in concert with marketing so that the company can grow more organically, as opposed to having to completely revamp marketing because now there's this new product or service and we've got to get it out, to the public. So things need to work. The more silos we can break down, the more cooperation we can foster, the more likely it is that our company will be successful. Okay, so collaboration beats competition within teams. Next, small wins matter. Okay, and I'll be honest, this is one that I struggle with. My friend Bill Gross is always telling me, celebrate the small wins. and I'm not good at doing that at all. So, all right. So, um, so the battles, um, the battle that fought and won Kettle Hill was essential to the larger success at San Juan Hill, right? And so the fact that Teddy Roosevelt led this gallant cavalry charge that ended in the capture of Kettle Hill, that snowballed and allowed for the capture of San Juan Hill, which eventually led to the capture of Santiago de Cuba, right? And so this is somewhat similar to what I was talking about in terms of bold leadership, but this is refining it, because we can have a small win, and that may not necessarily bold leadership may not necessarily be required to create that small win. What may be necessary to create a small win is to stay focused, okay, so that we're not dispersing our resources in a way that we're not able to gain any victory at all. Okay, so a great example of this is Amazon. Now, if you've only been around as kind of a shopper and such for the last 10 years or so, you've only known Amazon as the largest online retail seller, and they sell virtually everything. Okay, but in the very earliest days for Amazon, all they sold was books. They were just they were the main online bookseller. Now they ended up wiping out most of the bricks and mortar book business, because they could have a much larger selection of books available, and they could sell them at a lower price because they didn't have to maintain bricks and mortar stores. Okay, but after they gained dominance in selling books, then they started using the systems they had built for fulfilling e-commerce and for marketing products online. They were able to use that to expand into other categories of products. And now they've gotten, like I just said today, to the point where you can buy virtually anything on Amazon. And especially if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can have virtually anything you want within 24 to 48 hours, it seems like. Now there may be some product you can't get that quickly. I've never encountered it. Okay, I confess to being an Amazon user, and it is it is absolutely dominant. The only close competitor to it is Walmart, and it's only because Walmart has made a tremendous investment over the last few years in building up its e-commerce operation. But the key to Amazon's success was to start small, to win in online book selling, and then move on from there. So small wins absolutely matter. Okay, next, logistics and planning are crucial. Now, just because your plans may fall apart, not come to fruition, and you'll need to adapt and be agile, that doesn't mean that, okay, so then I won't even bother planning and I won't even worry about logistics. No, quite to the contrary. These are crucial aspects of any success that we seek. Okay, and the better we deal with logistics, the better we plan, the more likely it is that we'll be successful when we need to pivot, when we need to exhibit agility and adaptability. Okay, so it was the famous German Field Marshal von Moltke. I've I've quoted him many, many times. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. That's essentially what he said, right? But this is sort of General Dwight Eisenhower said this, I believe, during World War II. He kind of said something similar, that uh, that plans fail, but planning is crucial. Okay. And what he meant by that was just this, that the more thoroughly we plan, the more we consider logistical needs and work to make sure that they can be met, the even when our plans fail, okay, we will be able to make those changes in directions. We will be able to adapt to meet our objectives in the best way possible. Okay. And we saw that in the Battle of San Juan Hill. I've already talked about all the logistical failures. Okay. And one of the things that the battle did was show the U.S. Army it had a lot of work to do still in these areas in order to be more successful in battle in the future. So even great strategies will fail unless there's strong operational and tactical planning and logistical support behind them. Now, luckily for the United States, the poor logistics didn't sabotage the success at San Juan and Kettle Hills, but it could have, and in other battles, it did mean setbacks for the United States. Okay, now on the business side of things, a good example of where poor logistics basically caused a colossal failure was with Target when it entered the Canadian market in around March of 2013. So, Target wanted to make a big splash moving from the United States into Canada. It should have been an easy thing to do. The cultural differences between the United States and Canada are not nearly as great as they would be between, say, the United States and China or something like that. And nonetheless, uh, Target was not able to build a successful business there. And so, roughly 2 years later, in April 2015, Target exited Canada. By then, they had lost $2 billion. Okay, now we think of $1 billion now as kind of like, a billion here, billion there. $2 billion is a lot of money. Okay, no matter what time you're in, no matter what you're doing, $2 billion is a lot of money. Okay, and Target basically had to file for bankruptcy in order to keep its business alive. And a lot of the problems that it experienced in Canada were due to poor logistics. So there were other factors that created the failure, but poor logistics is one of the top, if not the top issue that caused Target's failure in Canada. So when we plan an initiative for our companies, whether it's a new initiative, whether it's support for something ongoing, whether it's just part of what the company is, we have to make sure that there's proper logistical support and planning for these so that they can be sustained. Okay, so we talked about building momentum. One of the easiest ways to kill momentum is to not have the proper logistics support planned, so that now you've got this small victory. You want to take advantage of it, but you can't, because as you turn back to look at the things you need, they're not there and ready to go. Okay, so logistics and planning are crucial. Even though oftentimes plans will go awry, that doesn't matter. We still need to plan. We still need to especially make sure that our logistics are in place in order to enable our teams to succeed. Okay, next, reputation can be built in a crisis. Perhaps it can be built most quickly in a crisis. Okay, so Teddy Roosevelt leading the Rough Riders up Kettle Hill as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, galvanized not just his Rough Riders and the and the other troops making up the total of around 8,000 that ended up being victorious at San Juan and Kettle Hills. It galvanized Americans in total. Okay. And it created a reputation for Teddy Roosevelt that essentially swept him into the White House. Okay. All amidst this desperate battle where they had slogged through jungle, dealt with heat, poor logistics, wrong equipment, okay, and yet they were able to get through and be victorious. So crisis does reveal character. You probably will learn more about a person when you see how that person responds to crisis than you could in 10 years of watching the person deal with just regular day-to-day life. Okay. Crisis galvanizes and it shows a person's true colors. Okay. And so an example of this was in 1982 when Johnson and Johnson had to deal with an incident where some bottles of Tylenol had been poisoned, and I don't remember the exact number of people now, but there were some people I believe who were killed as a result of taking Tylenol laced with poison, and people were they absolutely would not buy or take Tylenol after that. They were petrified that they would get poisoned by it, right? So uh, Johnson and Johnson stepped up to the plate. They did a complete recall of Tylenol. They pulled it all off the shelves, and they made it clear that what they cared about most was the safety of people to whom they sold products, and that they weren't going to reissue Tylenol until they were absolutely certain that it was safe for people to take it. And so by taking fast, bold action, by essentially accepting the situation and accepting responsibility for fixing the situation, Johnson and Johnson was able to weather the Tylenol recall quite well. Okay. And Tylenol remains today a very, very potent, valuable brand. And in fact, we generally don't refer uh, to the drug that is Tylenol by its name, which is acetaminophen. We call it Tylenol, whether it's plain wrap Tylenol, whether it's actual Tylenol or some other brand name for it. Tylenol is used the way Kleenex is used instead of facial tissue, or Xerox copy is used instead of photocopy, right? It has that iconic brand status that only a handful of brands really ever achieve. One of the reasons for that is because of how Johnson and Johnson responded to the Tylenol scare and recall back in 1982, right? Over 40 years ago today. Okay, so reputation can oftentimes is built in a crisis. Okay, and we need to remember that if our business hits a crisis point, because we can really take it on to a higher and more successful level if we keep our heads and do the right thing in a crisis, and unite our team around dealing with the crisis, resolving it, and moving on to better things. Okay. Um, Next, know the terrain, literally and figuratively. Okay. So, unfortunately for the American forces, they really did not understand the terrain in Cuba, and that's why this whole sort of jungle slog that preceded the charge up San Juan and Kettle Hills was so difficult. They were not prepared for the kind of terrain that they encountered. Right, almost criminal negligence, you might say, on the part of Army planners to not know what they'd be faced with in this invasion. Okay, and as a result, it took very bold leadership to turn the tide in the battle. So, from a business standpoint, okay, we need to understand the business landscape. We need to understand market conditions. We need to understand customer needs, and we need to understand competitive threats. Okay, and if we don't, it's unlikely that we will be successful. And a good example of that is when when Walmart decided to enter the German market. So initially, uh, Walmart bought two companies. I have their names right here. So Workoff and Interspar. Okay, a total of about 95 stores. Okay, and so Walmart planned to essentially relaunch these stores as Walmart stores in Germany. Okay, and this initially took place in 1997, 1998. And unfortunately for Walmart, over the succeeding decade, they struggled. And in 2006, in fact, on July 28th, 2006, just 19 years ago, not quite 19 years ago, Walmart announced it was exiting the German market. It sold the remaining 85 stores it still had to a German retail group, and it incurred $1 billion loss as a result. Now, why was Walmart not successful? Well, there are several reasons. One is cultural misalignment. So, Walmart stores in the United States, they have mandatory cheerleading in the morning when the stores open among the employees. They have smiling greeters. The way they bag groceries, all of this confused or annoyed German shoppers. By the way, I get it. That kind of stuff is I find it annoying, but whatever. Most people don't in America, but they certainly did in Germany. Germans in general prefer a low interaction, calm, efficient shopping experience. They're not into all the cheerleading and that kind of stuff. And so that was a major market misread on the part of Walmart. Next, they faced very tough competition from discounters like Aldi and Lidl, where they had ultra low prices, very streamlined operations. And so Walmart's everyday low prices did not stand out in Germany the way they did here in the United States, right? Walmart is pretty much the only absolutely low price major retailer in the United States. Target really doesn't fill that market anymore. Target is more of kind of a niche player these days. And things like dollar stores and such, they're just not large enough to compete with Walmart, where you can get like Amazon, you can get virtually anything at Walmart. And so in Germany, there were two large major competitors to the Walmart business plan. And so why would Germans shop at Walmart why would they switch to Walmart? What would be their reason for doing that when they're getting the same thing from Aldi and Lidl, and which were German businesses. So that was another problem. So another problem was Walmart did not understand the legal and regulatory climate in Germany. So their pricing strategy violated German laws against predatory pricing, where you're not permitted to sell below cost. And also their labor practices were out of alignment with German labor practices, where there's strong worker protections, there are work councils, and so so Walmart had a lot of labor issues as well. So those are some of the main reasons that Walmart failed in Germany, and you can see they were all as a result of Germany not understanding the terrain. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. They were all as a result of Walmart not understanding the terrain on which they would be dealing when they opened up in Germany, or when they bought the 2 chains and converted them to Walmart stores in Germany, right? Major misread on Walmart's part, billion-dollar loss out of the market, and all because they just did not properly understand the terrain. So I'm gonna stop there. There are some other lessons that we could draw from the Battle of San Juan Hill, but I think that, you know, the ones I'll quickly review the lessons that I covered. So first of all, bold leadership inspires action. Number 2, preparation can be inadequate. You have to adapt and be agile anyway. Number 3, you need to leverage momentum. Number 4, collaboration beats competition within your teams, within the different parts of your company. Number 5, small wins matter. Okay, they are the basis on which we can build momentum. Number 6, logistics and planning are crucial. Right, plans come and go. They always have to be supported by strong logistics and good planning, so we can make those adaptations, make those shifts. Number 7, reputation can, oftentimes is, built in a crisis. Okay, so crisis is as much an opportunity as anything else. And then number 8, know the terrain, literally and figuratively. The failure to do that will ultimately mean failure in your venture. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Hope you found this useful, interesting. Would love to hear your comments. All the links to social media will be in the show notes after the episode posts on YouTube. And let's see, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And I'm going to be talking about a phenomenon known as lifestyle creep. Okay, if you're not familiar with this, it will eat away your finances. Okay, so we're going to talk about lifestyle creep tomorrow, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time. On Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, join me at Jiggers' place, Jiggers' place, I should say. This is my every other week show where we sit back, we have a cocktail, and we talk about all of the things not related to finances. And this Thursday, we're going to be talking about etiquette. It is one of my favorite topics. And yes, Emily Post will come up. If you think that etiquette is what wealthy and upper class people do in order to put the rest of us down, I urge you to join me on Thursday at 5 p.m. at Jiggers' place and find out really what etiquette is all about. By the way, if a wealthy person puts someone down, they are exhibiting absolutely horrendous etiquette. And then on Friday, which is July 4th, I'll be having a special edition of the Way to Wow shows in honor of Independence Day at 10 a.m. Friday. I hope you'll join me for that. And I hope you'll be inspired in your celebration of the day. And then next week on Monday, we're back again, 10 a.m. Pacific time with Trust and Estates Weekly. And a week from today, I'll be back for the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So thanks again for joining me. Really appreciate your viewership. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my